Ladies and gentlemen, sons and daughters of purpose, let me tell you something today. You didn't just survive. You didn't just endure. You passed a test you didn't even know you were taking. God hid an exam inside your last season. You thought you were just dealing with pressure, betrayal, delay, confusion, but heaven was conducting a silent assessment. The enemy wanted it to break you. God used it to build you. And guess what? You passed. You thought it was just a hard season, but it was a test in disguise. God never tests you in a place of comfort. The exam was hidden in rejection, silence, delay, and pressure. We often expect life's examinations to come in obvious forms. A challenge we can prepare for, a question we can answer, a moment we can recognize as significant. But divine testing rarely looks like a classroom. God's tests are not announced. There are no study guides, no revision periods, no pens or papers. Instead, his exams are wrapped in ordinary circumstances that seem unfair, uncomfortable, or even unbearable. That's the mystery of divine assessment. It hides itself in plain sight. God hides his exams in seasons, not in classrooms. Why? Because seasons test more than your memory. They test your maturity. A classroom measures how much you know. A season measures how much you trust. And trust is the currency of the kingdom. The season you went through, the one where you were rejected by the people you loved, ignored by the ones you helped, isolated without warning, delayed without explanation. That season was not just random suffering. It was a silent, sacred examination. While you were asking, why is this happening to me? Heaven was watching. How will you respond to this? Rejection was not meant to hurt you. It was designed to refine you. When people turned their backs on you, it was not the end of the story. It was a divine filter to expose who was really for you and who couldn't go where you're headed. What you perceived as a breakdown in relationship was actually a breakthrough in vision. You began to see clearly. You began to stop depending on voices that had nothing to do with your destiny. That was part of the test. God was watching if you could release the approval of man and cling to the approval of heaven. And then came the silence. That long stretch where God didn't say anything. You prayed and heard nothing. You worshipped and felt nothing. You obeyed, but doors stayed closed. You cried and heaven seemed quiet. Let me tell you, the silence wasn't absence. It was assessment. The teacher always goes silent during the exam. God was watching what you would do when your emotions were not being fed, when your ego wasn't being stroked, when the spotlight was off. Would you still walk in faith when there was no fresh word? Would you still worship when there was no visible reward? That was part of the test. Then came the delay, not just any delay, the kind that makes you question if you heard God right. You were told soon, but months passed. You believed now, but nothing moved. Delay is one of God's most strategic testing tools. Because delay reveals motives. Delay exposes impatience. Delay forces you to choose between convenience and covenant. You couldn't manipulate the clock, so you had to surrender your calendar. That moment, when you let go of your deadline and said, God, have your way in your time, you passed a section of the test. And let's not forget the pressure. The kind of pressure that made you cry in the shower. The kind that made you question your calling, your purpose, your very identity. Pressure is never random in the hands of God. He uses it to squeeze out the false and reveal the authentic. Diamonds are formed in pressure. So are leaders. So are chosen ones. God wanted to see how you would handle wit without recognition, responsibility without applause. Could you carry it when no one said thank you? Could you show up when no one was watching? That pressure wasn't punishment. It was preparation. And that preparation was a test. The reason God doesn't test us in comfort is because comfort conceals weakness. But seasons of struggle, seasons of uncertainty, seasons of pain, they strip away everything superficial and force you to lean on Him. That's when the test becomes powerful. That's when God says, now I know. Not because He didn't already know, but because you needed to know. You needed to see that your faith wasn't based on outcomes, but on obedience. That your joy wasn't rooted in what you had, but in who you trusted. Some of you have wondered, why did it have to happen like that? Why did it hurt so much? Why did I have to go through that betrayal, that job loss, that breakup, that sickness, that silence? Because the test was in the season. God was measuring your endurance, your loyalty, your integrity, your resilience. He wasn't just preparing a blessing, He was preparing you to carry it without compromising your soul. And here's what makes God's tests different. They're always tied to purpose. When heaven tests you, it's not for grades, it's for growth. God doesn't need to see how smart you are, He wants to see how surrendered you are. Your ability to submit when nothing makes sense, to stay faithful when nothing feels fair, to keep walking when the road disappears, that's the exam paper. Every yes in pain, every amen in confusion, every step in the dark, there were answers. And you gave them. You passed in silence. You passed in tears. You passed when you stayed humble after humiliation. You passed when you prayed for people who hurt you. You passed when you served without spotlight. You passed when you didn't defend your name and let God be your vindication. It wasn't a classroom, it was a crushing. It wasn't a test with pencils, it was a test with pressure. It wasn't graded by people, it was approved by God. The test was hidden, but heaven saw it all. When God is silent, He is not gone, He is watching. Every divine promotion begins with divine quiet. The teacher always goes silent during the exam. There is a sacred weight in the silence of God that few understand. It is not emptiness. It is not abandonment. It is divine strategy. Many times we interpret God's silence as His absence, when in fact it is His presence in its most intense and observant form. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is a different kind of communication. It is the language of trust, the space where God steps back and allows you to walk on what He already said. His silence is not disinterest, it is assessment. The problem is we're conditioned to associate God's involvement with noise. We think movement means miracles. We think sound means power. But often, the most profound moments of spiritual transformation happen not when the heavens roar, but when they go still. That's when you learn who you really are. Silence reveals the foundation of your faith. Are you following Him for His voice or for His heart? Are you obeying because you feel something or because you know something? When God stops giving fresh instructions, do you still hold to the last word He gave? Or do you panic and create your own plan? These are the questions answered only in silence. Silence strips you of dependency on emotional confirmation and draws out your rootedness in His character. Think about it. The greatest tests in Scripture were not surrounded by noise. They were drenched in silence. When Abraham took Isaac up the mountain, there was no booming voice every few minutes. Just a father walking up a slope with a knife in one hand and faith in the other. Heaven watched. When Joseph sat in the prison after interpreting dreams and being forgotten, there were no angelic visitations or supernatural fireworks, just a calling buried in a dungeon. Heaven watched. When Jesus stood before Pilate accused and innocent, He didn't argue, He was silent. And heaven watched. Silence doesn't mean God isn't working. It means He's letting your faith do the talking. This is why silence is never wasted in the kingdom. It is always pregnant with purpose. In the silence, God isn't checking how loud your worship is. He's checking how deep your roots are. He wants to see if you can stay planted when the rain stops. He wants to know if your heart still beats for Him when the music fades, when the oil seems dry, when the prophetic flow goes quiet. You see, when heaven is quiet, it doesn't mean heaven is inactive. It means the test is in progress. The teacher doesn't talk while the students are taking the exam, not because they are absent, but because they are observing, measuring, watching every reaction, every pause, every sigh, every decision. In the realm of God, silence is surveillance. It's in the silence that your private convictions are measured. Anyone can praise when the prophecy is flowing. Anyone can worship when the breakthrough is visible. But can you stay anchored when there's no sign? Can you keep sowing when the ground looks barren? Can you pray and still believe when you don't hear anything back? God's silence trains your spirit to walk by faith and not by feeling. It's where you stop living off goosebumps and start living off the Word. It's where you graduate from being a believer who needs signs to a son who knows his Father. In silence, your discernment sharpens. Your vision clarifies. You stop looking around and you start looking within. You stop needing daily confirmation and you start living out your calling. Divine silence also exposes false dependencies. When the noise dies down, you realize how much you were leaning on affirmation from others, on external confirmations, on emotional highs. Silence reveals idols. Silence reveals where you run when heaven gets quiet. Some run to distraction, some run to self-effort, but the chosen run deeper into the Word. They go back to the last instruction and anchor themselves there until the next one comes. There's a maturity that only silence can build, because in the noise, it's easy to fake faith, but in silence, you can't hide. Silence shows if you trust God's timing or just His talking. That's why God often delays His next word, not to punish you, but to position you. He wants to see what's guiding your decisions, impulse or intimacy. What you do in divine silence determines what you can handle in divine promotion. If you can't survive silence, you're not ready for spotlight. If you need constant noise to function spiritually, you're not ready for spiritual authority. Because the people God elevates are people who can stay faithful without applause, without validation, without noise. People who can sit with the silence and say, even if He doesn't speak, I still trust Him. Don't curse the silence. Don't despise it. It's not punishment, it's proof. It proves you're no longer a spiritual child needing milk every moment. It proves that God trusts you enough to test you without constant intervention. Silence is a vote of confidence from heaven. It means you're growing. It means you've been entrusted with a higher level of responsibility, the responsibility of walking without constant reassurance. So when God goes silent, don't retreat. Don't panic. Don't assume something's wrong. Instead, recognize the moment. The exam is in session, and heaven is watching, not to catch you failing, but to qualify you for what's coming next. The trial was not meant to destroy you, but to show you to yourself. What you did in the dark qualifies you for what God will do in the light. The wilderness is one of God's most sacred tools for transformation. It is not a place of punishment. It is a place of preparation. It is not designed to break you, but to uncover you. Because sometimes, before God introduces you to your future, He has to reintroduce you to yourself. The wilderness is never random. It is a divine strategy, a place where everything unnecessary falls off and everything essential rises up. God does not use the wilderness to crush the chosen. He uses it to clarify them. And make no mistake, every person who has carried great oil, deep revelation, or heavy influence has had to walk through a wilderness season. Not to lose their faith, but to discover it. When you're in the wilderness, you are stripped of comfort, convenience, and crowd. You are left alone with nothing but the word, the whisper, and your own will. And it's in that space, that dry, confusing, often painful space, where God begins to reveal what couldn't be seen in the busy, blessed public seasons. He reveals the motives, the fears, the pride, the dependence on applause. But He also reveals the hidden strength, the real hunger, the raw faith, and the fire that never made it to Instagram. The wilderness doesn't ask who you claim to be. It shows who you really are. It was in the wilderness that Moses discovered he was more than a murderer and a fugitive. He was a deliverer. It was in the wilderness that David learned how to worship without an audience and lead sheep before he ever led a nation. It was in the wilderness that Jesus, fresh from baptism and divine affirmation, was tested, proven, and prepared for public ministry. The wilderness is not where purpose dies, it's where purpose is purified. Some of you have been crying out, God, where are you? You felt lost, forgotten, misunderstood. You've looked around and seen nothing growing, nothing moving, no confirmation, no fresh word. But what if I told you that you were exactly where God wants you to be? What if I told you that this wilderness was not a detour, but a divine design? In the wilderness, your titles don't matter, your connections don't work, your gifts don't impress anyone. You're faced with the raw reality of your soul. And that's where God starts shaping destiny. The wilderness is not a season of silence from heaven. It's the workshop of heaven. God is doing His deepest work when everything feels the most still. He is removing the counterfeit, the surface level strength, the spiritual shortcuts. He's making sure that when the door opens, you'll be someone who can handle what's behind it. Wilderness seasons are also seasons of testing. Not to see if you fail, but to show you how far you've come. Every temptation you resisted, every complaint you turned into worship, every night you prayed through instead of giving up, all of it was heaven recording your hidden victories. And the beautiful thing about God's testing ground is this: He doesn't just test your character, He reveals your calling through it. Some of you discovered your real strength when the support stopped. You learned to pray not because a pastor told you to, but because you were bleeding in private and had no other option. You learned to fast not to look spiritual, but because you were desperate for clarity. You served not because it was trendy, but because God said serve even when no one clapped. You stayed when it would have been easier to run. You forgave when revenge would have felt better. And you did it all while no one was watching. That was the wilderness working for you. The wilderness proves your readiness for visibility. Because if you can stay faithful in obscurity, you can be trusted with influence. If you can worship in pain, you can lead in power. If you can obey when it hurts, you can carry authority without corruption. This is why God uses the wilderness to protect you from arriving too early, to grow you before He shows you. You thought it was a delay, but it was development. You thought it was isolation, but it was insulation. You thought it was rejection, but it was redirection. The wilderness doesn't take your anointing, it reveals how deep it runs. It doesn't rob you of vision. It strips away every distraction until your vision is purified. In the wilderness, what's fake dies and what's real comes alive. You stop relying on borrowed faith. You stop copying someone else's fire. You stop performing for approval. You stop becoming who God always knew you were. That is the beauty of the wilderness. It takes your hidden obedience and turns it into future oil. What you did in secret, the prayers, the tears, the journaling, the surrender, the yes with no reward, that's what qualifies you for what's coming. God never forgets wilderness obedience. Heaven always rewards what was cultivated in the dark. So no, the wilderness did not break you. It broke what was weak in you. It exposed what was fake around you. But it didn't break you. It revealed you. The you that could survive when nothing made sense. The you that could believe even when you couldn't see. The you that is now ready for what others had to fall to receive. Your faithfulness in the unseen places has placed you in the line for open doors. Before God raises a person, He tests their character in private, away from applause and platforms. In the kingdom of God, promotion never begins on a stage. It begins in a secret place. It doesn't start with a microphone, a following, or a title. It starts with a test that no one sees. God doesn't anoint someone because they look ready. He anoints them because they've proven something when no one else was watching. Heaven's process always begins in obscurity. When God wants to raise someone up, He watches what they do when no one is clapping, when no one is watching, when no one is offering a reward. That's where the real elevation begins. People chase platforms. God looks at private places. Man sees appearance. God weighs substance. Public honor is never the starting point in God's economy. It is the result of quiet decisions, unseen sacrifices, and personal obedience. The oil always falls in private before the crown is ever seen in public. When God found David, he wasn't in a palace or even in a lineup. He was out in the field, worshipping, protecting sheep, killing lions and bears with no one around to tweet about it. He wasn't trying to be discovered, he was simply being faithful. What David didn't know was that while he was fighting battles in secret, heaven was taking notes. And when the time was right, God sent for him. Sent for him, we will not sit down until he arrives. Samuel said David had been promoted in private long before oil touched his head. That's how God operates. He sees the moments when you choose integrity over impulse, when you tell the truth and it costs you, when you serve and no one notices, when you forgive and no one apologizes. These moments don't make headlines, but they shake heaven, and heaven never forgets. Your private faithfulness is heaven's qualification process. The reason God promotes in private is because He's more concerned with your becoming than your appearing. Public elevation without private formation is a trap. If you get to the spotlight before you've been formed in the shadows, the weight of visibility will crush you. God hides His chosen ones on purpose. He lets them be overlooked, underestimated, even forgotten. Not to punish them, but to preserve them. Because what is birthed too early dies in the open, but what is cultivated in private carries power that lasts. So if you've been in a season of silence, a place of obscurity, rejoice. That means God is forming something strong in you. That means He sees something the crowd can't see yet. Don't despise the private tests. They are the very things writing your name into the next chapter of favor. That daily obedience when you're tired, the prayer when no one responds, the work behind the scenes that no one praises, it's all part of your promotion exam. Heaven does not promote based on appearance or ambition. Heaven promotes based on alignment. God is not looking for the loudest voice. He's looking for the most surrendered heart. He's not impressed by talent alone. He weighs character. And the testing of character always happens where no spotlight shines. What you do in secret either builds your platform or disqualifies you from one. The decisions you make when you're invisible are the foundation for how long you'll last when you're visible. That's why God watches the private room more than the public room. You may be crying, God, when will my turn come? And God may be saying, I'm just waiting for your character to catch up with your calling. And this is why many people miss their door, because they want the stage before they've submitted to the silence. But in God's kingdom, promotion is never a reaction to popularity. It's a response to proven loyalty. God doesn't rush elevation. He lets it simmer. Because anything that matures in stillness carries the weight of substance. Jesus Himself lived this. 30 years of silence. No miracles, no public signs, no followers, just obedience, just faithfulness, just character being formed in the carpenter's shop. And then suddenly the heavens opened, the Spirit descended, and the voice of the Father declared, "This is my Son in whom I am well pleased." Notice, God didn't say, "This is my Son in whom I will be pleased" after He does miracles. No, He was already pleased. Why? Because Jesus had passed the private tests. He had lived in alignment with heaven when no one knew His name. Your season of obscurity is not a curse, it is your consecration. God is setting you apart, protecting your purity, guarding your oil, building your stamina, preparing your name to carry a weight beyond your own ambition. You may not see it now, but your quiet yes is shaking doors open. Your unseen tears are watering seeds of influence. Your silent obedience is writing your invitation to rooms you haven't even imagined yet. So, stand firm. Serve when it feels pointless. Pray when no one sees. Give when no one claps. Love when it hurts. Because the same God who watched you in the hidden place is the same God who will honor you in the open one. Heaven never skips steps, and it never forgets sacrifices. What looked like punishment was actually preparation. The storm wasn't an attack, it was a setup. Every delay had direction. Every loss had a lesson. One of the greatest lies the enemy will whisper to the chosen ones is, God is punishing you. He wants you to interpret divine preparation as divine rejection. He wants you to see discipline as disapproval. But the truth is, when God is preparing you for something great, it rarely feels comfortable. It often feels like you're being crushed, not crowned. But the crushing isn't punishment, it's process. Preparation is messy, it's misunderstood, and it often masquerades as a storm. You prayed and things got worse. You fasted and doors slammed shut. You obeyed and people left. It didn't make sense. And because you didn't see the purpose, you assumed there was punishment. But let me tell you something foundational. Heaven does not waste pain. When God prepares a vessel, He always allows it to pass through pressure, not to destroy it, but to shape it. You thought the delay was denial. It wasn't. It was divine alignment. You thought the loss was a curse. It wasn't. It was God removing the weights that would have crushed you later. You thought the silence meant heaven had turned its back. It hadn't. It meant the classroom had begun. Because every chosen one is taken through preparation that feels like punishment, but it's actually the mercy of God at work. The reason it felt like punishment is because God was touching things you thought were secure. He was shaking what you were leaning on. He was dismantling false identities. He was stripping away every crutch, every idol, every shallow source of confidence. Not because He was mad at you, but because He was preparing to give you something weighty. And before God gives weight, He tests your foundation. That heartbreak didn't come to kill you. It came to expose what you were building your identity on. That disappointment wasn't an attack. It was an X-ray. God let the dream die to see if you still trusted the giver. He let the plan unravel to see if you would still say yes with nothing guaranteed. And through all of it, He was preparing you quietly, deeply, intentionally. You didn't know it then, but the tears were watering a future assignment. The pain was training your discernment. The pressure was expanding your capacity. Every no was creating space for a better yes. Every delay was heaven keeping you from something you would have settled for. You thought you lost time, but God was actually preserving your life. What you called a storm, God called a syllabus. It was part of the curriculum of the called. He took you through the valley because there were things in the valley you couldn't learn on the mountaintop. The valley taught you how to walk by faith, not by sight. The valley forced you to pray from your spirit, not your feelings. The valley trained you to hear His whisper without needing a miracle to confirm it. That's the mark of those God is preparing. They go through before they go up. They break before they carry. They are misunderstood, rejected, passed over, not because they are forgotten, but because God is shaping something weighty in secret. He is building depth. He is developing endurance. He is forging faith that won't collapse when the winds of life blow hard. You are not being punished. You are being positioned. God is putting you in place for something your character must be ready to sustain. He is not trying to hurt you. He is trying to heal the places in you that success might otherwise expose. That's why He delayed some relationships. That's why He allowed that door to close. That's why the thing you wanted so badly didn't work. It was never a no to your destiny. It was a yes to your maturity. Heaven promotes what it has tested, and every test is preparation for trust. God doesn't trust influence to people who can't survive silence. He doesn't give weight to those who fall apart under pressure. So He trains you in private, behind the scenes, in moments that no one applauds. You learn obedience through suffering. You develop intimacy through isolation. You grow authority through surrender. Preparation always feels harder than you expect. That's because it's tailored to your assignment. You are not average, so your process won't be either. God doesn't develop generals in comfort. He develops them in the wilderness, in delay, in fire. So what looked like punishment was actually heaven declaring, I'm getting you ready for more than you asked for. Look back. That season didn't kill you. It made you. You're wiser now, stronger now, clearer now. You don't panic like you used to. You don't crave validation like you once did. You've lost some things, yes, but you've gained discernment. You've gained depth. You've gained an unshakable knowing that even when nothing makes sense, God is still faithful. So don't mislabel your process. Don't call it punishment just because it hurts. It's proof that heaven sees something in you that's worth developing. The shaking is not to destroy you, it's to establish you. The loss is not the end, it's the lifting. You were never being punished, you were being prepared. Doors don't open because you knock hard, they open because you're ready. The next season is not a surprise, it's a reward. Heaven doesn't pay with money first, it pays with opportunity. In the kingdom, movement is not based on noise, popularity, or hustle. It's based on readiness. God does not open doors to the loudest voice, the fastest runner, or the most ambitious mind. He opens doors to the most prepared heart. This is why some people knock and nothing happens, and others whisper a prayer and a whole new realm opens. Because the door isn't random. The door is responding to what heaven has already seen in you. You didn't just survive a rough season. You passed a test. You stayed when others ran. You served when others slacked. You remained faithful when nothing seemed to be working. And while it looked like nothing was happening on the outside, something was happening in you. Maturity was forming. Discernment was sharpening. Character was solidifying. And now, not by accident, not by luck, a door is opening. God is a rewarder. He doesn't forget private loyalty. He doesn't ignore secret obedience. You didn't cry for nothing. You didn't sow all those seeds in vain. You didn't say yes when it was hard just to be forgotten. heaven keeps record. And the way heaven rewards its chosen ones isn't always with a check, it's with a chance, a door, a divine moment that shifts everything. You don't have to chase what's already assigned to you. When you're ready, the door finds you. That's why Joseph went from prison to palace in one conversation. He didn't promote himself. He had no connections, no public following, no platform, but he had character. He had interpreted dreams in private when there was no reward, and now God was ready to let him interpret one in front of Pharaoh. That wasn't a random door, that was a rewarded door. Heaven watches how you handle seasons of silence to determine what kind of door you're ready for. If you can steward obscurity, you can be trusted with opportunity. That's why Jesus said, "He who is faithful with little will be made ruler over much." The door is heaven's declaration that your little was never little. It was just hidden. And now God is about to show why you had to go through what you went through. This is why your timeline doesn't match others. This is why it took longer for you. This is why the road felt harder. Because your door isn't cheap. What's behind it is heavy. What's behind it is generational. What's behind it is legacy. So of course the preparation felt intense. Of course the delay felt confusing, but none of it was wasted. You weren't being overlooked, you were being overhauled. And now that God has finished that layer of work, the next stage can begin. The opening of the door is not a favor, it's a signal. It's heaven saying, "I saw your faithfulness in the fire, and now I'm moving you into fulfillment." You're not lucky, you're ready. You're not being favored at random. You're being rewarded by order. Because you stayed under when others escaped. You worshipped when you didn't feel it. You worked when no one was hiring. You grew roots when no one saw the tree. That's why this next opportunity is not going to be like the others. It's not just an open door. It's a design door. It's calibrated to your pain, your journey, your experience, your endurance. Others may see it and think, "Wow, that came out of nowhere," but you and heaven both know. This has been in the works for years, and now that the oil has been crushed, the vessel is ready to carry it publicly. There's no need to force it. When you're ready, you don't need to kick down doors. You just need to walk through the one that opens when heaven gives the signal. And when that door opens, walk boldly, not with arrogance, but with awareness. Awareness that this is not a coincidence. This is not a favor for your ego. This is an assignment that you've been shaped for. Because heaven doesn't waste promotions on unproven hearts. And heaven doesn't bless hustle, it blesses alignment. This door is the result of agreement between your obedience and God's timing. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it lasting. This is why God had to get your heart right before the opportunity showed up. Because a door too early becomes a trap, but a door at the right time becomes a launch. So now you see the delays were not denials, the detours were not setbacks. They were construction zones. Heaven was building something that wouldn't collapse under pressure. That's why it took so long. That's why it felt like everyone else was being accelerated. But now the season shifts. Not randomly, not emotionally, but by design. This door has your name on it. It's not just a door of opportunity, it's a door of validation. Heaven saying, "I saw you, I tested you, I prepared you. Now walk." Let me tell you something that will shift how you see everything. You are not here by accident. You were born for this moment. The pain was necessary. The process was designed. The preparation was divine. Every silent night, every hidden battle, every lonely decision was heaven writing a resume that no man could see, but God could approve. You didn't just survive, you qualified. And when God qualifies a person, no demon, no delay, and no rejection can disqualify them. Water, you're walking into a season that your past prepared you for. Doors are about to open, not because you pushed them down, but because purpose has aligned with time. And when purpose and time agree, destiny is born. You are not begging for blessings. You are stepping into what already belongs to you. You are not chasing favor. Favor is following you, overtaking you, and opening what was locked. So stand tall, not in pride, but in position. Position as God's chosen. You passed tests no one saw. You obeyed instructions that cost you everything. And now, heaven is responding. You're not about to be lucky. You're about to be launched. This is the season where God makes public what He did in private. This is the season where you step through the door, not as a stranger, but as an heir. It's your time. Not because you forced it, because you're ready.